one of the major things is a seller's disclosure notice. All single family properties, if you're buying it from an individual, there's some, if you're buying it from a government agency or from a new home builder or someone like, they're not required to give you one. But if you're buying it from another individual on a single family home, they are required, the seller is required to give you what we call a seller's disclosure notice. It's a notice, disclosure from the seller, basically stating what's going to stay with the property, whether it works, like is the air conditioner in good repair, has there been any repairs in the last whatever since they've owned the property, the roof's ever been repaired, if there's ever been any problems. It gives the buyer a place to start with, this is what the seller says about the property. Now the seller is to be honest about it, and that is transferred over to the buyer, or the buyer gets a copy of it at the time he puts an offer in, hopefully. If for some reason he doesn't get it at that time, there's a stipulation in the contract that the seller has to deliver it to the buyer within a certain number of days. That certain number of days is another negotiable item. How many days are we going to get the seller to give it to us? 2 days, 5 days? Right? Again, as a buyer's agent, I want to make sure that my buyer gets that either before he actually writes the offer or usually within 2 or 3 days. Because he needs to make a decision whether he wants to move forward with this offer.
Exactly.
Right? So, it's very important. So that is something the buyer gets to look it over. I think it's they just revised it. I think it's 5 or 6 pages long now, so it's pretty intense about, you know, what the condition of the property as the seller sees it. Right? Which kind of takes us, we're going to talk about this later, but takes us into the need for a home inspector. That's only the seller disclosing what they're going to do, or the way they see the property, what they know about it. But to be on the safe side, a buyer should always get their property inspected by a professional inspector, which he's going to go through it and, like with a fine-tooth comb, and pick that house apart.
Now,
The buyer's going to pay for it.
The buyer's going to pay for it.
He's going to do it for the buyer's interest only. It's not a requirement. It's not a requirement to get a loan. It's not a requirement. But again, this is a very large investment. A typical home inspection might run you $300, maybe $400. Money well spent. Because if you go in there, you want to make sure you understand what you're getting. Because the law states that it's what we call buyer beware. But when you purchase a piece of property, you're buying that property basically as is, where is. So the buyer needs to get it inspected and make sure he still wants to complete the transaction.
Now, you know, you bring up an important point here, because when I bought my first house way back in 1981, I didn't do that. I didn't get
It wasn't common practice in 81.
Right. Well, I didn't get an inspector, and I was naive. I was just young, you know, newly married couple and all this stuff. And we got the disclosure about some of the things of the house, but one thing I learned the hard way later was there was something wrong with the house that you couldn't see on the surface at all, even if you're looking through, because there was this in the back bedroom, bathroom, there was a wall. They had sheetrock behind the commode, some of the plumbing back in there, but they had taken out all the insulation apparently. Well, anyway, we had this big freeze, and I remember coming home one night from work, and actually it was in the morning, and my my bedroom and the bathroom were a lake, because what happened was we had this big freeze.
Pipes broke.
The pipes broke when things thawed out of it, because there was no insulation back in that wall, but you couldn't see that there was no, because the wall was covered up.
Correct.
And it wasn't reported. I never had the house inspected, and I've got this lake in my bedroom. And of course it took us a week or two to get everything back to normal, and that just went back to, apparently that was not reported to us on a disclosure, and we had no inspection to alert us to that, and it wasn't until we had this big freeze and then the thaw when the pipes broke. So that's the danger you can be in.
That is a danger. Unfortunately, even with a home inspection, though, being that it's a wall, with brick on one side and wall on the other, a home inspector might not even find that.
I don't think he would have. in
He
this
probably
case.
wouldn't have. But the seller, if they knew of it, if the seller knew of it, it should have been disclosed. Goes back to that whole honesty thing, right?
Right.
Now,
so the ethics of it.
well, but again, let's not jump to conclusions.
Okay.
The seller might not have known about it. Maybe that was done prior to them even owning it.
Well, in my case,
I
well,
mean,
that's
maybe it was-
that's a
I-
good
I-
possibility. I just know that the people we bought it from were the only owners.
Well, in that
Before
case,
we-
they probably knew it, and maybe not. Maybe they trusted their plumber to fix it. The plumber came in, fixed it, put the wall back up, and maybe the plumber didn't disclose to the buyer, to the seller, he didn't put the insulation back in.
You know, that's a
You
very
know,
that's
so,
a
so let's not ever jump to conclusions. And I think that brings up a really good point, because you will have people sometimes say, well, the seller didn't disclose this. Well, first thing is, did the seller know it? You know, you got to understand, like in that case, what if they just paid the plumber to do it? The plumber did it. He took the shortcut and didn't put the insulation back in it. And he covered the wall back up, plastered up. They might not have even
You know,
known.
that's an excellent point,
Right.
because just recently we had a brand new dishwasher break down on us, and of course we thought the company we bought it from was responsible, but when we had the repairman come in to fix it, he found that what messed up this brand new dishwasher was a installation screw that had fallen down into the motor, and that wasn't the business that sold us fault. That was the fault of the installers who came over, and they were too lazy to take that screw out. They put a different screw in. But we learned that
Right.
the hard way. But see, I'm thinking, I would have thought at first it was the fault of but it wasn't. It was the installers instead.
Yeah, just
So-
like back to the problem you have with the plumbing.
Exactly.
If you'd had it inspected, it might not even been discovered. Is the seller at fault? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the plumber that did it originally.
Right. And
Okay,
see,
so I never like to jump to conclusions on anything. Okay,
Right.
let's look at everything from all different aspects. You know, so maybe it should have been disclosed, but maybe the seller didn't know. Would the inspector have caught it? I don't know. But
Well,
back to getting it inspected, the inspector will know, because he will come out and test the AC to make sure it's cooling down. Okay, that it's circulating well. Okay, will run your dishwasher, he will run your water lines and turn everything on and see that they drain well. And he will check the roof. He will take a look at the foundation. You know, he'll do a lot of things for you. Money well spent. That's all I got to say. And since you were telling stories, I got one little short story to tell you here. I had a gentleman a little over a year or so ago purchase a property through us. We were representing him as the buyer. We ourselves stressed how important it was to get an inspection. He was buying this property out in kind of a rural area. It was on like 5 acres, and he was buying it from a bank. Now, a bank is not required to give you a seller's disclosure. Okay, it's not an individual. Remember telling you that a while ago?
Ah, yes.
But a bank very clearly says you're buying it as is, where is, no guarantees or warranties of any kind.
Buyer beware.
That's right, buyer beware. Well, the buyer, to save the $300 or $400, did not get the house inspected, even though we strongly encouraged him to do it. I
Remember
told
we
you it's
got-
not required.
Remember, we got 1 minute left in the show.
Okay. So, make a long story short, he went out, he purchased the house. It turned out that the house had never been hooked up to water and did not have a septic system. He calls us, then 2 days later, $14,000. Now, for $300, he would have discovered that, wouldn't he?
That's right.
So,
So he
it's
loses. That's why
tough
it's well,
lesson, isn't it?
$14,000.
And I always tell people that story when they don't want to do the inspection.
I know. That's something that needs to be done.